Buenos Aires, President Mauricio Macri of Argentina on Monday hailed his party's strong showing in midterm elections as a mandate to press forward with a controversial package of labor, tax and pension reforms that he says will put the country on a path towards sustained economic growth. "We have entered into a period of permanent reform," Mr. Macri said, smiling broadly at an early morning news conference. "Argentina must not stop and must not fear reforms, because to reform is to grow, progress, evolve." Mr. Macri's alliance, Cambiemos, or Let's Change, exceeded analysts' projections for Sunday's vote, becoming the first party since 1985 to win in Argentina's 5 largest electoral districts. It picked up 9 seats in the Senate and 21 in the lower house of Congress, bolstering its count in the legislature, though Cambiemos remains a minority bloc. Former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, the standard-bearer of the Peronist Party, won a Senate seat that will give her a formal platform to continue fighting Mr. Macri's policies, which Mrs. Kirchner says benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor. The office will also probably shield her from prison if she is convicted of pending corruption charges. But overall, Mrs. Kirchner's party did poorly, underscoring how weak Peronism, the dominant political force here for decades, has become in the Macri era, largely as a result of internal divisions. Continue reading the main story. Related coverage. Argentina's leader, Mauricio Macri, bolstered by election results Oct. 22, 2017. Body found in Argentine river shakes up election Oct. 19, 2017. As Argentine elections approach, 2 disturbing mysteries loom Sept. 30, 2017. Police and protesters clash over disappearance of Argentine activist Sept. 2, 2017. And more broadly, the gains by the Macri alliance appeared to be another setback for the left in Latin America. In Brazil, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016 brought an end to 13 years in power by the Workers' Party. And in Chile, former President Sebastián Piñera, a conservative, appears to have a comfortable lead in the race to replace the center-left president, Michelle Bachelet, next year. Seeking to capitalize quickly on Sunday's results, Mr. Macri said he would call the country's governors, key lawmakers and leaders in the judiciary to accelerate progress on labor and tax policy overhauls, his priorities. The message appeared intended to reassure investors who have long complained about the difficulty of doing business in Argentina. "The government wants to create a system to promote employment," said Fausto Spatorno, the chief economist at Orlando Ferriers and Associados. "Today it's so expensive and risky to hire people in Argentina that there is a high rate of unemployment, and the under-the-table economy is huge." Accelerating Mr. Macri's agenda carries significant political risks, analysts say, because the government's plan to cut Argentina's deficit, currently about 4.2% of the country's gross domestic product, will require unpopular cost-cutting measures. "The government is putting forward an agenda of reforms that are essential but carry important political costs," said Sergio Berenstein, a political commentator. "So the plan will be based on gradualism. Every day we'll see something new." Mr. Berenstein pointed out that high public spending was one of the keys to Mr. Macri's electoral success. Photo. Former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner of Argentina won a Senate seat in legislative elections on Sunday. Credit Loiana Servente Din, via Associated Press. The markets, which have eagerly snapped up the billions of dollars in debt Mr. Macri has issued since coming into power in December 2015, gave an immediate vote of confidence to the government. Argentine stocks rose in both Wall Street and Buenos Aires, while the peso strengthened. Although Argentina's economic recession is over, Mr. Spatorno said more needs to be done to make sure that growth is sustainable in the long term. The World Bank recently projected that Argentina's economy would grow at a 2.8% rate this year and 3% next year, a strong performance in light of the lagging recovery in neighboring Brazil, a key market for Argentine goods. Sunday's election was a high point in the rise of a young political brand that came into power 2 years ago when Mr. Macri, a former mayor of Buenos Aires, won the presidency by billing himself as the new face of Argentine politics. It leaves him as a rare, powerful, and relatively popular president in a region where several other large countries are currently led by deeply unpopular lame duck leaders. The Interpreter newsletter. Understand the world with sharp insight and commentary on the major news stories of the week. Sign up. See sample privacy policy opt-out or contact US anytime. Mr. Macri's candidate in the Buenos Aires province, which is home to nearly 40% of the electorate, won a 4-point victory over Mrs. Kirchner. Mrs. Kirchner went on a charm offensive in the final stretch of the campaign, dialing down on the defiant style that has come to characterize her politics. She billed herself as the best hope of putting the brakes on what she called Mr. Macri's austerity policies. On Monday, she was notably silent. Analysts said that divisions that had emerged in the opposition would make it easier for the government to seal the necessary alliances to get legislation through Congress. The truth is that Peronism has never been this weak, said Mario Fornoni, director of management and FIT, a political consultancy. It has gone through low points before, but the main difference now is that it doesn't have any clear leadership, and the person who is claiming to be its leader is rejected by a large segment of society. The days leading up to the vote took on a summer tone after the body of an indigenous rights activist, Santiago Maldonado, was found in a Patagonia river last week, more than 2 months after he was reported missing after a protest that was broken up by security forces. Mr. Maldonado's disappearance became a rallying cry for the opposition, and Snap opinion polls suggested that the discovery of his body would hurt Mr. Macri at the ballot box. But preliminary autopsy results, announced Friday, suggested that Mr. Maldonado drowned and had no visible bruises on his body. If it wasn't for the preliminary autopsy, Macri would have surely lost a few points, Ms. Fornoni said. On Monday, Mr. Macri vowed to continue supporting the judiciary to find out the truth about what happened to Mr. Maldonado.